When you can't find the light to guide you through the cloudy day, when the stars ain't shining bright, it feels like you've lost your way. When the candle lights of home burn so very far away, boy, you got to let your soul shine, just like my daddy used to say. Used to say, soul shine, it's better than sunshine, it's better than moonshine, damn sure better than rain. People don't mind, we all feel this way sometimes. You got to let your soul shine, shine, break of day.
Wonderful. I hope you like our opening music for the launch of the Fundraising Toolkit with Catalyst 2030 and our amazing team at For Impact, who has helped us so much in this work. I do want to start off with a little grounding exercise to keep everyone refocused from your crazy day, what you started to do, what you're in the middle of, and get you ready for this session in particular. If you're able to be on camera, we are very thankful for that. So thank you for joining us. So just take a moment. If you want to lower your eyes, you can, and just take a moment to breathe and listen. To live content with small means, to seek elegance rather than luxury, and refinement rather than fashion. To be worthy, not respectable, and wealthy, but not rich. To study hard and think quietly. To talk gently and act frankly. To listen to the stars and the birds, the babes and the sages, with open heart, to bear all cheerfully, and to do all bravely. Await occasions, hurry never, in a word, to let the spiritual, unbidden, and unconscious grow up through the common. This is to be my symphony by William Henry Channing. So I thought we'd get a little grounding before we started. In true Catalyst way, we'd love to know who you are, where you're from. Please do put in the chat message who you are, where you're coming from, and if there's something about fundraising that you want to learn, please add that as well. And we might not cover it today, but we have a whole series planned out for you that we are more than happy to share with you and give you that information. So as you're putting in the chat message, who you are, your organization, and what you'd like to learn, I just want to take a few moments to talk about the fundraising handbook and how it evolved. So over the last 2.5 years, we've been working with this amazing crew of social entrepreneurs and impact leaders and fundraising experts. And that includes Lisa Corcoran from For Impact and Grace Montgomery, but also Natalie Rexstead from For Impact and her team. And it became very clear that our Catalyst members really wanted more details and information about fundraising. And we have so much experience with our Catalyst members that we thought we would put together this toolkit. We know fundraising is such a challenging endeavor. There's so many things out there that you can get and so many resources, and how do we boost our organization's impact? How do we streamline those internal tasks? How do we make fundraising the heart of the organization? And we like to say that fundraising is an all hands on deck effort. So everyone from the fundraiser person with the title to the executive director to the interns that work for us, everyone's a fundraiser, board of directors as well. But the heart of the organization at the end of the day is the people that we work with and the communities we work in. And so fundraising, while it is central to the work that we're doing, we need to make it where it's not as overwhelming. We need to help people raise those funding and get the resources they need to do this important work. So we tried to put together this comprehensive resource, easy to read, follow information, so that it'll help you with your your fundraising efforts. And in this toolkit, we provide lots of information, practical skills, valuable resources to help guide you in your fundraising activities. Hopefully it's a little step-by-step, how to get started, what to look at, looking at other opportunities that you might not have thought of today, which our grounding point for today is to talk about the 7 pillars of fundraising and the different ways to do that. So we know it's not perfect, and we're doing the best we can. But so if you do have suggestions for us, we're more than happy to take that information on and put it together. We also want to thank our team members from the Enabling Environment team, and Winifred, who I don't even know if we reminded her of this first session. She was an intern along with Maru from our team, have put this together in the last 6 months and really done a great job helping us tie it all together. So I wanted to thank you all. The first module is available. We'll put that in the chat. Again, please introduce yourself and your organization. And I'm going to pass it off to our beautiful speakers today, Lisa and Grace from For Impact, and have them kick us off.
Let me get my computer going right. Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. It is such an honor to be here. Anytime I get to be in community with the Catalyst 2030 members, it's a good day. So thanks so much for having us here. My name is Lisa Corcoran, and I am here today with my coworker and teammate, Grace Montgomery. We come from a social enterprise based in the US, but we work around the world. We're called For Impact. We help social impact organizations tell their stories, fund their visions, and develop their teams to do this. We have been working with Catalyst 2030 for the last couple of years, providing some of these classes and masterclass series to help bring fundraising to incredible social impact leaders around the world who are doing phenomenal work. We are humbled and we don't take for granted for even a second that we get to be here with you all today. So thank you. I also want to acknowledge all the other organizations who helped put this fundraising toolkit together. I wish I could share with you all a behind the scenes snapshot of how Catalyst 2030 went about this fundraising toolkit. They did so deliberately, and they solicited input and advice from social impact leaders, from fundraising people, from organizations all around the world. And it's coming out in batches, as you'll see, but I just want to applaud and thank the Catalyst 2030 team for the way they did this. I saw in the chat that Natalie from Black Fox is here, and the Black Fox team especially, a sister organization of ours, was so helpful in putting this together, and they're doing a series of fundraising sessions for Catalyst 2030 this year too, so you absolutely need to check those out. So thank you all, everybody, for all the work to get us here to this point. So what a great day. This has been a work in progress for many, many months, over a year now, and it's a great day to be here to ring the bell and roll out the fundraising toolkit. So today, what we're doing is a really basic overview of fundraising. And the reason we're starting here is because the Catalyst 2030 community is so diverse that we have some organizations that are, fundraising for 7-figure budgets, and we have other individuals in the room who have an idea and are ready to hit the ground running with it, and they haven't yet, raised any money. And so we're trying to provide something that's accessible and applicable to everybody. So today is a high level overview of 7 types of fundraising. It's almost like 7, maybe you can think about it like 7 sources of revenue. You could think about 7 ways to fundraise. So this is high level, but it's meant to be so. And every session from here on is going to go deeper. So if you leave today feeling like, okay, what do I do with that? Hang on, and that the more technical how-to parts of this are going to be coming as the series unfolds. But because we don't want to leave you with only kind of academic, big high-level thoughts, I'm going to focus on these 7 revenue streams, and then I'm going to hand it over to my coworker and friend Grace, who's going to give some really practical content around how to communicate with funders. From where we sit, this can oftentimes be one of the biggest challenges that social impact leaders have. And it's such an interesting it's such an interesting dilemma because social impact leaders are so passionate about the work they do and they're so educated on the work they do. And for some reason, when we take the group of us and we put us in front of funders, we sometimes lose some of our ability to communicate on a human level. And sometimes we become a little bit robotic and we feel like we need to pitch 40 slides in 2 minutes. And funders leave these conversations, they tell us this, they leave these conversations really confused. So Grace is going to spend some time later this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are, talking about a really great framework we use at For Impact to communicate with funders, whether that be in conversation, over email, in a grant application, it doesn't matter. So let me kick us off. And what I'd love to hear from you all, I would love to do just a little bit of word association. So if you don't mind my asking, when you hear the word fundraising, and you put one word to that, you have one word that you associate in your brain. Can I ask you guys to drop in chat? What's the one word you think of? Debbie says overwhelming. What is your word association when it comes to the word fundraising? Yeah. Never the same discussion twice. Yeah, I feel that, Susan. This is great. This is what we find really, Natalie Sacred. I love that. This is what we find really no matter what part of the world we're in. And it really comes down, people's responses are usually one that, you know, it's nerve-wracking for me, or it's intimidating, or sometimes I have a bit of an inferiority complex is something we hear. And then we also hear people saying it's about relationships and it's about trust. And I think both of those things are true. What I notice in the world of fundraising is that most of us are what we think of or call accidental fundraisers. I suspect nobody in this room went to university to learn how to fundraise, right? And I suspect nobody in this room got into the line of work you're doing because you wanted to fundraise. Most of us got, you know, we fell in love with the work it is that we're doing, and fundraising is a necessary component of that. It's a necessary component to make sure that we're able to have the impact that we want to have. And so we're kind of find ourselves in this accidental fundraising role. And what we find at For Impact is that a lot of our organizations have functions and rigor behind a lot of processes. We have a finance function and we have rigor behind it. And we have an onboarding process and we might have an annual review process. But when it comes to fundraising, a lot of the time it ends up being a little bit piecemeal. We put it together as we go. We respond to a request for proposals, or we get a meeting and we stop everything to get ready for that. So a lot of what this funding toolkit and the subsequent sessions are aimed to do is to put the process and the motor in place to help it become a repeatable, systematic function within your organization. All right. And so that's one of the goals here is to pull it into a motor that's running and that you can kind of rinse, wash, and repeat over and over. So let me start today with just super, super big picture. What is fundraising? I think you could ask 20 people and have 20 different answers. But when we think about it, it's you know, just the process behind soliciting financial support. And like so many of you said in the chat just a minute ago, it's a way for organizations to build relationships. And when it comes to fundraising, we think about it in many different forms. And I'm going to go through those today, but really at its core, if you leave today with nothing else, fundraising is about aligning our cause, our mission, our vision with the funder's cause, mission, and vision. That's how we're going to ensure that the time we spend fundraising has a return on it. We want to spend, at the end of the day, we want more time with better funders. All right, nobody in this room has enough time for fundraising. You all most likely wear 17 different hats on any given day. So I would like the time you spend fundraising, I'd like you to have a return on that time. And so in order to do that, we want more time with better funders. And the way we get to better funders is we make sure there's that alignment. Okay, and we're going to spend time, you know, over the course of these series talking about how to ensure that. But let's look at these 7 core pillars of fundraising. And these slides will be sent out afterward. You'll have access to all of them. And the way I think about these, they're different funding streams or different revenue streams. And the reason we talk about all of these is that a lot of times we find organizations focus just on one of them or just on 2 of them. And sometimes we're leaving some potential funds on the table by not looking, across the whole spectrum. So we're going to go do a brief overview of each of these 7 core pillars. I'm going to focus a lot on 3 of them today because I think 3 of them are probably the ones that you could unlock the quickest and maybe the most effectively. So I'm going to talk about all of them, but the 3 I'm going to really focus on today are grants, donations, and events. All right. But let's start with earned income. And the reason I love starting here is a lot of times organizations don't really think about, can we earn revenue? A lot of times when organizations are nonprofits or social impact organizations, they think of their revenue model as being all donations. But what we find is that a lot of social impact organizations around the world have the ability to earn revenue. Let me break it down just a little bit. One way that probably most of you have seen is selling products or services. And, the way this, if you have a social impact organization that is designed to help, micro enterprises across a certain region of the world, perhaps you could think about, selling some of those products. This is probably not surprising to anyone in the world, but we find that there's a lot of revenue to be gained there. But the other part of this that I want to think about is that philanthropic funders love to see some diversity in your revenue. And so I believe that your social impact organizations will be more competitive in the grant process, or even will rise to the level of an individual funder when they realize they're not the only ones funding this. So if nothing else, even if you're only pulling in a little bit of revenue on with some of these options, selling merchandise or doing some cause marketing, it allows you to go to a funder and say, we have a diversified funding model. We are sustainable and we're not dependent on one source. So we're able to weather different storms. And I'm seeing more and more that this is something that funders care about. One thing I didn't share in the beginning is that in any given year at For Impact, about 40% of the work we do is with funders who bring us in to work with their portfolios, to train their grantees. And so a lot of what I share with you today is going to be the point of view of the funders. And this is what they tell us. They like to see this diversified funding. The one I really do want to talk about as far as earned income is concerned that maybe people are not thinking about is right here around consulting or training services. I have seen this happen so many times, and I want to share it with you. So many of our social impact leaders are absolute subject matter experts in the field that they work in. They're complete rock stars. They're out doing the work, walking the walk while they're talking the talk. And you have such value in what you've learned along the way. And so we're seeing quite a bit of success in these social impact leaders having I don't know really if this terminology will make sense to everybody, but almost having like a separate arm of their social impact organization that offers consulting. So just by way of a quick example, I work with an organization that does STEM education in East Africa. And their curriculum is brilliant, right? And they offer it mostly for free in schools. But what they've done in order to diversify their funding stream is they have opened a small consulting arm within their nonprofit organization. It brings in funding, but it also allows them to fund their work. All right, so I'd encourage everyone to think about that a little bit. So here we are with earned income as one way. The second, which I think is a way that a lot of people traditionally think about fundraising, is grants. This is probably the first thing that comes to mind. And there's lots of types of grants, right? It's a diverse ecosystem. It's one word that we all use, but there's a lot to unpack within there. I think I'm a lawyer by training, so forgive me if this doesn't resonate with anyone, but I almost think of grants like contracts, right? A lot of times there's a grant agreement, and an organization will grant money to your organization, but they'll expect something in return, and that's usually spelled out in the grant agreement. Now, sometimes the funds coming through grants are unrestricted, and we can spend them however we want. We can answer the areas of greatest need. Sometimes it's really specific. It's almost like a fees for services. We see this a lot, especially with government grants, where a government will give a certain amount of money, but they want it to be spent in a very particular way. So there's all types of grants. When we think about philanthropic grants, these are typically coming from foundations that exist to give away money. All right, this is the most traditional type, and these organizations are set up to fund causes they care about. When it comes to philanthropic grant making, the key, and again, I don't believe this is going to surprise anyone, but the key is to find those organizations who are aligned to the work you're doing. We, and actually, Catalyst 2030 team, I'd love if I can in the follow-up email to share a hyperlink with you all. We're doing a lot of work at For Impact around how to use AI to find leads or prospects who are aligned with your work. And we have this great 15-minute video of ways that our team is using AI to help find these philanthropic foundations who are aligned with your work, to cut down some of the time we have to spend on research. So we'll share that resource with you all in the follow-up, and we'll make sure it's in the toolkit as well. So we need to make sure there's alignment there. A lot of times, philanthropic foundations will shift their focus. Right now, we're seeing a lot of foundations shifting their focus to climate. And I see a lot of organizations wondering, do we shift with them? I think it just depends on what is our own strategic plan. What is it that we're trying to do? But one thing I would really love to share with you all is that it's okay to take a prospect off our list once we fall out of alignment with them and move on, find new funders, find ones that are more aligned with what it is we're doing. All right. We've got corporate grants, which come from corporations. Community grants often come from, a community foundation. And I think my big high level thoughts around grants, I just want to share a couple with you on how can you in your position, work smarter when it comes to securing and finding grants for your organization. And that would be, I'd like to bring us back to what so many people put in the chat early on, and that's the importance of relationships. And so often we find that organizations spend a lot of time interacting with the grant portal, right? So they're submitting a grant and they're checking on it. What we would really encourage any organization to do, if and when possible, before even starting to write the grant application, if we can get a visit and connect with that funder, the chances of success go up infinitely. Now, a lot of times we'll find a foundation in doing our internet research, and I suspect everyone in this room has seen those dreaded words, which says something like application by invite only. Right? It's like you're reading the website and you're like, got it, we do that, we do that. Oh, you fund in India, that's great, we're in India. And like you're, getting excited, and then you get to the bottom and it says, by invite only. And at least for me, that feeling makes my stomach sink. But what I want to encourage everyone to think about is, it does say application by invite only, but it doesn't say we can't, it doesn't say phone call by invite only or connection by invite only. So what we do a lot with the organizations we work with is we reach out to these foundations over email, over snail mail. Real mail works quite well. And we say, like, I understand it's by invite only. I would just love to meet, learn more about you, hear about your philanthropic priorities, tell you a little bit about the work we're doing in Kenya, and just see what type of alignment's there. We're not always going to get a yes, but we're certainly going to get more yeses than if we don't reach out at all. And so I really want to encourage, when it comes to these grants, which can feel transactional because they are often based on a transactional written agreement, let's still try to make sure we're infusing the human element and connecting one-on-one. So a few thoughts on grants. The last thing I'll say before I keep moving into our different revenue streams, and you're going to hear me say this quite a few times, as far as an organization's health and sustainability is concerned, when it comes to fundraising, I really would love to encourage everybody to diversify your funding sources as much as possible. And that's true even within the grants. world. So, you know, in an ideal world, perhaps you could pursue some grants from a family philanthropic foundation, and then another one from a corporation, and another from maybe an institution like a government. Because when things change, you know, whether it's, you know, whether it's world events or whatever it might be, the economy, when things start to change, the more diversification we have, the more stable we are. And so sometimes I think that even means taking a strategic decision to spend time on a smaller grant because it's diversified than going for all of the same types of grants. All right. One last note on grants is it's really important to have a pipeline and have a process. And, you know, these grants, you know, sometimes they'll be incoming, sometimes we'll be signed up on listservs and we'll hear about it, but by and large, we need to be outward facing, doing the research, finding them. So I would encourage every organization in here, every leader in here, if you're looking to build a grant pipeline, I think probably the most practical tip I could give you is carve time out for it every week. And it can be you, it could maybe be one of your team members, it could be a volunteer, it could be an intern. And if you could set a goal for yourself, I want to identify 3 funding opportunities a month or 3 a week, whatever it might be. But we really do need to be deliberate about carving out that time, because if we're not, what we find behaviorally is that something else always comes over and takes up that time. We could talk about for a long time why that is. I think it's probably because fundraising intimidates a lot of us. So it's, and I'm speaking for myself as well. I hope that's clear. So it's really easy to push that to the side to do something that's like a little more comfortable for us. So as far as grants, you know, and really all fundraising, just carve time out for it each week. I have one last practical tip, if it's okay, before I move on. I promised I would spend more time on grants, and here I am. I went to a funder panel about a month ago, and there were 5 foundations on this panel. They were all funding on the African continent, just to contextualize it. And someone asked them the question, when do you respond to a cold email? And how can I get more of my cold emails responded to? And I think this is a question probably most of us have. And I thought the answer was really illuminating. All 5 of the foundations shared that when they receive a cold email, they look to see if the person sending it or the organization is signed up for their listserv, because they need some way to like separate who they're going to respond to and who they're not. And they wanted to see that the person sending the email had put in some work and got to know the organization. So that was just a little hack I learned in this session. And now I share it a lot with people because that's an easy thing we can do. Sign up for the listserv if there is one for a foundation. Another thing that they shared is that they like to see people interacting with their LinkedIn posts. I realize everyone's really busy, and interacting with LinkedIn posts is sometimes at the very bottom of a list, but perhaps this is work you could ask a volunteer to do or a junior person on your team. Okay, moving on, let's think about donations. And I think if we're getting really technical, to me, the difference between, you know, a donation or a grant is really donations. Typically, when we use that word, we think about individual giving. A lot of times it is less restricted than grants, but not always. You might have some individuals giving to you who want to give to a really specific project or a really specific region. We believe that this area of giving, this individual giving, is, you know, sometimes one of the quickest ways we can start to build a funding base. And usually there can be a shorter runway than with some of the larger funding revenues, with some of the larger revenue streams. So when it comes to individual giving, you know, oftentimes you'll hear people talk about major gifts. What a major gift is, you know, it just depends on your organization. For some organizations we work with, they would consider a major gift, you know, 5,000 US and above. Others, it's 500 US and above. The reason I think it's important to think about what is a major gift for our organization is that group of people you're going to treat a little bit differently. There's going to be a higher touch point. I want to compare that to something that we think of as like annual giving or online giving. And these are people who kind of just give here and there, maybe as a result of like a crowdfunding campaign or something like that. Okay. And so the major gifts, we're gonna be a little bit more strategic as we're protecting your time. We can't be that level of strategic for everyone who's ever given. But once it's a major gift, we're gonna think a little bit more strategic about how to keep them involved in our work and how to maximize that funder. All right. How do we find individual funders? You know, the subsequent sessions are going to cover that. So and it will be in the toolkit, but I do want to just plant the seed of thinking about how to find and engage individual funders. All right. How to find and engage them. This is a great visual that the Catalyst 2030 team put together. And Grace is really going to spend some time when I hand it over to her in about 5 minutes, talking about how can you engage people around the work your organization is doing. And we're going to talk about how to clarify the mission, share the vision. In subsequent sessions, I'll talk about the process we're going to put in place. And there'll be time in subsequent sessions talking about how to actually make an ask. But as far as these first two that Grace is really going to touch upon as well, we should really think big when it comes to our communications with funders. The framework Grace is going to share works for foundation heads. It works for government institutional funders. It works for individuals. But the important thing, no matter the type of fundraising, is that we are engaging around the work we're doing and that we're having a great conversation with the funder around the work. We're sharing the story of what we do, and we're talking about how they can help. All right. So one revenue stream, one type of fundraising that I suspect all of you have heard of before, if you haven't been to them, is an event. There's galas, there's auctions. Sometimes people will run a 5K race and run it for a certain organization. I think the big takeaway I have for any of you, if you want to think about events fundraising for your organization, I would encourage us to think about it as a way to build our funding pipeline. Let me unpack what I mean by that. So let's pretend like I'm just going to use one example. We hold a webinar. Okay, it's a low cost, easy event to host. And we bring in maybe some of our field team, and we bring in a couple voices from the field, and maybe 20 people come to that webinar. And maybe some of them represent a corporation, some of them represent a foundation. It doesn't matter to me. But what I would love to do is use that event as a launching point to then reach out and connect with those participants one-on-one. I believe we'll have better funding results by doing that than we will by using this webinar as a chance to make an ask of the group. If we ask the whole group, thanks for coming today. We're doing all this incredible work. For us to continue, we need $5,000 US. Please consider donating. Most people in that room are going to think someone else is going to do it. So I would use it as a launching point to then connect one-on-one. All right. That can be for a 5K race. It can be for it can be for anything. It can be for a gala, anything. I use it as a launching point and a way to build our pipeline. Okay, next type of revenue stream or fundraising is community business partnerships. And we think of this as matchmaking between your mission and a business's goal. We're not just asking the business for money, but we're offering them value in return. Perhaps it's visibility in the community, or maybe it's employee engagement where their team members will come work with your organization. Maybe it's access to your expertise or your network. The most important thing about these community business partnerships is we find that alignment between what the corporation needs and what it is our nonprofit needs. I want to make sure that every leader in this room hears this today. When we enter these partnerships, we are equal players. We are not, groveling or begging them for funds, because you and your organization bring absolutely as much to the table as this corporation brings to the table. right? When they have this corporate social responsibility arm, they're able to then use that as marketing. They're able to engage their employees. They are getting so much benefit from it too. So when we come to the table to negotiate what this partnership might look like, don't ever for a second feel like we're on unequal footing with these corporations. All right, memberships. I'm going to just talk quickly about creating a community that sustains your mission. The membership fundraising stream that we see work the best at For Impact is this one right down here, and that's giving circles. And we have a lot on our website at For Impact. Grace, actually, if you don't mind just throwing that in the chat, that'd be great. On our website, we have quite a bit on giving circles. And giving circles are a great way, especially for organizations who are just starting to fundraise. And what we can do is we can go to a group and we say, we're building this giving circle. We're looking for collective support. And you can set that amount at whatever your organization needs at this moment in time. But the cool thing about it is once we build a giving circle or a leadership society, sometimes it's called a founders circle, we can take this group of people who have joined and treat them as one. And we say, your collective support enabled us to do A, B, and C this year. And it's a low, what am I trying? It's high return, but low effort on the part of the social impact leader. So I really love these ideas of giving circles. And friends, the last pillar I want to talk about is crowdfunding. This is probably the one you need to hear about from me the least. I suspect I'm probably one of the older people in the room. So one, you all are probably more savvy in crowdfunding because you're younger than me. Two, it's the one that we hear about the most, I think, online. I think crowdfunding certainly has a place in the fundraising landscape. It allows us to build a movement, to share the work we're doing broadly and quickly. My only caution around crowdfunding and sending out, these big, massive emails and asking your board to forward it along is oftentimes we are not maximizing those individual funders when we're doing a crowdfunding campaign. It still serves a purpose. What I would make sure we're doing then is taking those people who have given via the crowdfunding platform and then make sure we're connecting with them one-on-one at some point. Making sure we're connecting with them one-on-one at some point. So let me come back to the beginning, and then I'm going to hand it over to Grace. We looked at 7 core pillars of fundraising. And really, the reason that we went through all 7 of these, albeit a little bit quick, was to help maybe stretch our brains a little bit and think about different ways we can be bringing revenue into our organizations. The best thing we could do is diversify our funding streams. So if you could develop your strategy to use a couple of these revenue streams, I think you'll find your organization in a much healthier position. And no matter the pillar of fundraising, there's a challenge that we all have in the social impact sector, and that is to be able to convey what we do in a clear and compelling way, to get the people with whom we're speaking to get excited and want to get on board. So to that end, I'm going to hand it over to my friend Grace, who's going to talk about messaging for fundraising.
It would probably help if I unmuted myself. That would be. Thanks, Lisa, so much. Oh, it's so good to see you all, and I'm so excited to dive right in. So, with all of these ways to fundraise, the next questions are to think about where do we start and how do we get started? So, at For Impact, we have 3 key pillars to fundraising. Underlining it all is this core tenet of impact drives income. For us, we believe that the size and scope of your impact determines the size and scope of your income. When we think about this, we think about how people want to engage and learn about how they can make a difference in the world. It invites them to then be motivated and excited to give and support you. So in thinking about this, how would we build a fundraising strategy with driving around impact? The first, and what I'm really going to focus on today, is designing your story. We believe that's the core pillar to jumpstarting to how you rally your team around your story and develop your processes to find prospects, prioritize prospects, and strategize around prospects. So then you can fund your vision. So I would love to go to the next slide if that's okay. Thank you so much. Let's see. Beautiful. Let's see. Okay, awesome. So For us, when we develop a fundraising strategy, we think about story. And for us, story means the context your organization operates in. It gives meaning to why you do the work you do and why others should be excited about your impact. For us, a story contains 3 parts. It's anchored in purpose, it simplifies what you do, and it prompts action for support. So I'll dive into what I mean more with that with something we have at For Impact called the Altitude Framework. It's designed for simplified communication around your story, as Lisa was saying earlier. And we've based it on visits that we've done with funders and found that they're generally asking these 3 questions. At this 30,000-foot level, the why do you exist? At the 14,000-foot level, where does the money go? Or what do you do? And then at the 3 feet level, how can I help? So again, this altitude framework we're talking about can be how you apply it in a grant, how you have a regular conversation, you meet someone at like an event or something, how you structure your conversation, or how you even craft an email. We like to think about, are we delivering and answering on these 3 questions? So on here, you'll see on the right-hand side, there is, oh wait, let me go back, sorry. On the right-hand side, there's something called Stop Zombies Now. So this is a silly example we came up with at For Impact, but even though it's silly, we wanted to, show that even the most simplest and fun of causes can have a way to answer these 3 questions. So this is something we call an engagement tool. And it's a 1-page document that simply tells your story, again, answering those 3 questions in a visual and engaging way. We call it an engagement tool because it's meant to engage people. It's not like a 1-pager where you put down all the facts about who you are, why you're doing what you do, where you're going, etc. It's meant to create a dialogue and to have a conversation around. So not only are you engaging with someone else, but you're learning about what excites them and interests them about what you're doing. So I'm going to go through each altitude now and think about how you could answer those 3 main questions I started with. And then I'll also reference using this tool for this organization that we came up with at For Impact, just to give a little bit more context. So the 30,000 foot is what we like to think of, and the reason we call it altitude is if you're in a plane thinking about your cruising altitude, you're in the sky, you just see, beautiful blue sky or even above the clouds. So it's big picture thinking. And with that, we ask the question of why you exist and towards what end. Now, before I go into this more, I like to think about this from a practical perspective. So how many of you have ever had a conversation and someone asks you, what do you do? And before you know it, you're explaining your programs, you're explaining what you're doing down to the details of everything, and you're looking for how you're looking for support. And all of this is great, and it's going to be part of the story, I promise. But what we like to say is we need to elevate and think about context. We have to think about what we're going towards and why it matters. And we find that the -- question of funders is toward what end or why do you exist? Again, it's about giving context and creating meaning and purpose. We've all had instances whether we're doing a project or even if we're, writing an email to someone, we're thinking, why am I doing this? What's the point of this? We all come back to elevating towards a purpose that motivates us and excites us and engages us. So we have to think about that and how we're telling our story, not only to prospective funders, but also how we're rallying our team, our staff, our major supporters in telling our story and buying into our story. So 30,000 feet or 10,000 meters is, again, that cruising altitude of the plane. It's about your vision, your aspiration, and your reason for existing. So in any conversation, we like to say, whether it's with someone who, has been right by your side as you're starting your organization, or it's someone you just met, you're at an event, we like to say it's a great place to start to set the context of the work, your why. And again, what we like to do with something like an engagement tool is at 30,000 feet, we like to have a simplified statement that answers toward what end or why do we exist. So for this fun example, our purpose on here is to eradicate zombies forever. So in a silly way, we are answering toward what end. And overall, this is like a vision statement and that it's meant to cast to a staff, to board, to donors, to everyone, why you do the work you do and what impact you want to have on the world. Now for us, we keep it at the top of something like an engagement tool or a document where you're talking with a prospective donor. because it's like a guiding star. Again, it gives that context and meaning to everything we do. And also, as people who usually read from, top to bottom, it's the first thing we look at. So as we discuss our why, we continue to provide context, and such context, we like to say, after we've said in a simplified manner why we do what we do and toward what end, we can say other things like our founding story, why were we founded? What led us to create this organization? We can also say the problem and scope of our work. So for this example with the zombies, there's a graph that's saying, here's why we exist. We're here to solve this problem. And then we can also say something like, oh, okay, well, additionally, these are our partners and who are helping us in achieving our vision. So it gives context to your why and saying where your work is extending to and why you're comprehensively addressing the work that you do and, with different partnerships across different sectors. So we say there's plenty of different ways to, strengthen your why and to engage people around it. So next, altitude would then be 14,000 feet. And for us, the reason why we call it that is based on our friends in Colorado who house one of our offices at Fort Impact. Many of their mountains peak at 14,000 feet. So we find that it's often the view from the top of the mountain, and it's about bringing down from that, cruising altitude, that big picture, and thinking about focus. So for us, it answers that question of where does the money go? It's about where you list your priorities and your initiatives, about explaining what you're doing in order to carry out your why. So you're descending down again from that big picture of why you do what you do, what you've set out to do, and then giving it more grounding of, okay, this is what we're doing. And if possible, what we like to do is think about it in bucketing it in 3. So this isn't a hard and fast rule, but we found that with how humans process things, that oftentimes if we can do things in 3s, it's really much easier to internalize, process, and engage around. So I'll go into what I mean more by that. When we think about things like, okay, if something's 1, there's no choice. 2, there's a conflict. More than 3, there's too much. So it's honestly scary when I first started at Fort Impact, how many things in our lives are around 3s. Like, not only is this altitude framework I'm sharing a 3, but also so many things around us, like, telling a 3-act play, red lights, green lights, yellow lights. Like, there's so many things in 3s that help us process and internalize things. So that's something that we like to lead with when we're talking about our priorities in the work that we're doing. So that's something I invite you to think about is, what are some examples of how you could bucket what you do into 3 for your organization? And for here in this example that we have for the Stop Zombies, we've bucketed it into awareness and education, emergency response, and prevention. And we don't write out what each of these mean in this tool, for example. We're just giving meaning towards where the money goes and verbally providing detail in a conversation. We want a donor to, ask more questions about what we're doing, saying, hey, okay, what do you mean by awareness and education? That really interests me. We're inviting them to engage more and to learn, and which again helps us learn more about what they're excited about. So for us, I give the practical example of, like, if we were talking about to eradicate zombies forever, we have a model that consists of 3 key components, and they're all interconnected together. One is emergency response and how we build partnerships. The other is prevention. How are we providing resources as we prepare for eradicating zombies? And lastly, how are we educating people? How are we building awareness and continuing to build that prevention? And again, I want to say this is not a definitive rule. I've worked with many organizations where we can only think of 2, for example, or if we think of 4. It's just one way we like to think about as a starting block to process at a high level. How are you bucketing what you do, your programs, your projects? What are the 3 ways you can tell your story and tell what you're doing and where the money goes? So from there, we then dive into our last altitude. Again, another 3 is our 3 feet or 1 meter. And this is the ground level. This is you're on the grass, you're on the ground, your feet are grounded. And we ask that question of how I can help. And this is really where, if you're in a funding conversation, if you're in an email or you're talking to someone, this is where you get down to the numbers of things. So you present the opportunity to ask. And what we like to do here is to think about you know, again, presenting that opportunity, but basing it around impact. Again, for us, impact is what drives income. So I like to provide an example of, would you rather hear this pitch of, you know, $10,000 can keep my education program going for this year? There could be that pitch that we make. Or would you rather hear one like, to change the lives of 1,000 more children, we need the financial support of $10,000 to grow the reach of our education program? So again, presenting the opportunity for us, again, it's about numbers, but we're thinking about how we frame it around impact, about how we're elevating it back up to our why of to eradicate zombies forever. We want to prove this model across the United States, which is going to impact the safety, future, and well-being of millions of lives. We're going to need $26 million to do
Ja,
this.
ich
Can
grüße
we
Sie
talk
auch.
about how you
Kann
can
ich
fund us
vielleicht
toward this
nochmal?
goal? So this is just
Mach's
an
möglich.
example at the bottom here of different ways that we can get numbers onto the table in a way that is not as scary, because I know that's the scariest part of fundraising is asking for that funding. Actually going there and saying, I need this, can you help me? What we like to do again is frame it around the impact. You all are subject, you know, experts in your subject areas, and you know what you need to do to change the world. If you lead with that, especially with the conviction and passion that I know you all have, then it's going to be easy to tell your story and then to ask for that funding. We also like to think about at this altitude, other ways that people can support you. So not only do we have to think about our funding needs, we can think about how someone can champion your cause. This is another rule of three, folks, how they can champion our cause. Can they invite more people to become engaged? So maybe you have someone who, you know, has a really big network of people who they just seem to know everyone. Maybe they can invite more people to get to know you, and then you can have those funding conversations. And then, of course, if they can invest with a commitment. And for us, when we say invest with a commensurate commitment, we like to think about how it's related not only to how much like you can give financially, but also your passion in relation to the cause area itself. So, you know, some of us may not have as much funding to give, but we're really passionate about the area. So that amount of funding could, even if it's small, quote unquote, financially, is still a lot to give because it's a commensurate commitment to how committed I am to the cause. So once you have these three questions we're thinking about of, you're ready to go confidently out, whether you're writing an email to a new donor, you're having a conversation with someone you met on the street who you think could be, you know, you're already thinking, wow, they're going to be a great person to fund our work. We can answer why we do the work we do, what we're doing, and then thinking about how they can support us. Again, we'll go back to that diagnostic I had at the beginning where how you tell your story is foundational for then of how you create your team to support you, to go out and make asks, to build relationships with people. But it's also in how you find, you prioritize, and you strategize around the top donors to land visits. And again, as we like to underline it all, that how you're telling your story, how you're answering those three questions of why do you exist, why do you do what you do, you know, where does the money go, or what do you do, and how can I help? We have to think about how we're always leading with impact, how we're telling that story, because afterwards, that's just really going to invite people to engage, whether that be through supporting or through offering financial support. So I would love to, I know it's a lot of information and that's a lot of me talking. So I want to say thank you first and foremost for being here, for listening, but I want to hear from you all next. So if it's good, I would love to have us move to breakout rooms next to just process what we're thinking about and really think, let me go to that question. Think about what is something that spoke to you? Why did it speak to you? And then what we love to hear especially is what's something that you could take away to apply to your organization? And especially as you're thinking about the altitude framework that I just shared in those central three questions that you answer for your organization, is there something from there that you're already generating thinking, wow, I could apply that to, you know, how I tell my story? So we'd love to take this time now to go into these breakout rooms and to process.
Grace, we have a little glitch. In the back end, we've been trying to solve this. There is a problem with the breakout room. We've never had this. It's the settings are correct. So we apologize for that because I have some great people that are going to moderate the breakout rooms. So if we can go to the Q&A questions and
Yeah.
kind of kick off and answer some of those, Lisa, that would be wonderful. And apologies for
Oh
that,
my gosh.
Grace and Lisa.
Yeah,
No,
no,
no.
that's absolutely no problem, Debbie. And if we still want to go to breakout rooms, let us know. But
Yeah.
Grace and I could honestly spend like 4 days nonstop talking to
Really.
people. So we'll definitely go to the questions that people are putting in. Sorry, my computer's making funny noises. Okay, great. Here we are. Back in business. Before we do that, I would love, if it's okay with you all, just to tell one really quick story, because I saw a lot of commentary in the chat around the altitude framework, and I think it's worth us just sitting here for a moment, and then I see the Q&A, so I'll get to that if that's okay. And then Debbie, anytime you need to tell me to stop talking and you will go to breakout rooms, that's okay too. I love to share the story because I think it's really clarifying for a lot of social impact leaders. So there's this idea in the world of psychology. It's called the curse of knowledge. And I wonder if anyone's ever heard of the curse of knowledge. And I'll unpack it. And the reason I love sharing this is because I think it has direct implications for how we can get out there and talk about the work our organization is doing. The curse of knowledge is a human condition. We all have it. It's a human condition, and it comes into play when we unknowingly assume the person with whom we're speaking has the background to understand what we're talking about. I'm going to say it again because that sounds a little confusing, but bear with me. The curse of knowledge is a cognitive bias that we all have, where we unknowingly assume the person with whom we're speaking has more background knowledge than they actually do. Okay, we all have this. And in the 1990s, at a university in the United States in California called Stanford University, some social scientists, I've been cursed with that, me too. Some social scientists brought in hundreds and hundreds of test participants. To 50% of the group, they said, you all are going to be tappers, okay? What we want you to do is tap on a desk with your knuckle a song that's really well known. Now in the US, those two songs were Happy Birthday to You, Happy Birthday to You, and Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. All right, in different cultures, maybe it would be a different song, but those were the two they chose in the US. The other half of the group, they said, you all are going to be the listeners. What you need to do is guess the song. Okay. They ran this experiment over and over again, different times of the day, different, makeups of the test participants. And they said to the tappers, how often do you think the listener will correctly identify the song? And on average, the tappers said, we think the listener will correctly identify the song 50% of the time. They were practicing and they're like, I got this 50% of the time. Could I ask you guys, just for fun, could I get a couple people to drop in chat? What percentage of the time do you think they actually correctly identified the song? What percent of the time do you think the listener picked the song right? Thanks, Cassandra, 10%. And that's good coming from Cassandra because they're all about data at ID Insight. 20%, 40%, 25%. Yeah, thanks, guys. So we're all on the right page here. We know it was less than what they think, right? We know it was less than what they think. In actuality, the listeners correctly identified the song 2.5% of the time. The reason this is the tapper was hearing the words in their head. They were hearing the melody. They were probably even having a memory of a time they've heard that song. So even as they're practicing, they're thinking, this makes perfect sense. The listener, meanwhile, just hears a bunch of disparate taps that don't tie together whatsoever. It was written up in an academic journal afterwards, and the social scientists said that all the listener heard was a bizarre Morse code. So what happens to us, I think, as social impact leaders is we go out into the world and we're tapping happy birthday and we're hearing the words, and we have this memory of our 4th birthday party, and we hear like even a harmony coming in, right? And the listener is like trying to put it all together and trying to figure out how it all fits. And it's really challenging. And so I think a way that we can achieve greater fundraising success as a sector is to get really crystal clear about our message and not make assumptions about what the person understands or what background information they have. A lot of the work we do is so basic to us because we've spent our life doing it. Like we get it. So we jump right in, we come in hot. And I think we could do ourselves all a favor by employing that altitude framing and starting with that great big why we exist, and not just starting there, but engaging the funder around that, and then moving over to what it is we do and really simplifying the work. If we can do a group of 3, that's awesome. And then always coming down to how a funder can help. So I share that story because a lot of people tell me after the fact. I went out and I had a visit with a funder, and I tried really hard to make sure that I wasn't tapping weird songs on a table. So Debbie, is this an okay time for us to move to
Yep.
the Q&A?
Let's go to Q&A. Yep, sounds good. Some Q&A.
Okay, thanks, Debbie. Somebody wrote, do we have any tips for meaningfully engaging with funders who we primarily interact only online, like email, social media? It's more challenging to build relationships via email. It's Molly, thanks for putting that in there. And I hear this, and Grace does too, and probably the team at Black Fox as well. We hear this every single week. Someone saying we're having a hard time like breaking through that fourth wall and actually like connecting to a person one-on-one. You know, this is not going to be a satisfying answer. So for that, I apologize, but I hope it can be just maybe some encouragement. I think there's an element of creativity to fundraising that often we struggle to have the space and the bandwidth to get creative. But if we can prioritize creativity in the world of fundraising, especially for those top few funders that we need to get to, let's pretend like we've identified the ideal funder for us. I think if we can think about a really creative way. So if we're having a hard time connecting, perhaps what could we mail to them? What could we send in the mail? What type of a video could we make for them? I think, I don't want you to like employ a whole staff around this, but if it's one of our best funders, I would really encourage us to think creatively. I work with this organization in Lesotho that delivers nutrition packets and medication kind of last mile up into the mountains of this region called Mahatling. And we were having a really hard time, your exact problem, we were having a really hard time getting through to a funder. And this will surprise no one. There's not a lot of funders who are interested in Lesotho. And so when we found one, we can't let them go. Like there's not that many of them out there. And this was our number one funder. So our number one prospective funder, they were not currently funding. And so we often talk about employing what we call a last investor strategy. And it's a mental model, bear with me. But what we mean by that is if this funder was the last hurdle standing between you and having to shut your doors down, what would we do to get in touch with them? Would we send an email and then if they don't respond, say, oh, well, that was a good try? No, of course not. No one in this room would do that. So what would we do? We'd kind of think creatively and do anything we can. So what we did with this funder, who we knew had been to Lesotho because of some public blogs. We just took a phone and recorded one of the deliveries to show kind of the path the truck took. And then we showed the person walking up the hill. And it was zero production quality. It was just someone doing it on their phone. It cost nothing. It was so authentic and real and raw. And then we sent that over email. It was like our 20th email that hadn't been responded. But we said, I realized I should probably show you what it is we're doing. And that one got a response. I don't know if it was because of that video. I don't know if that's a correlation or causation. I don't know, but it did work. So I would encourage you to get really creative. Now you can't do that for every one of your prospects, but for your top few, I think it's a good idea to spend time and just embrace that element of creativity. Secondly, cast a really wide net and see if there's anyone out there in the world who can help you break through. And so there are times where I'm trying to get to a funder and I'm unable to do so. And I look on LinkedIn and I'm 3 degrees removed. I will sometimes reach out to someone I don't even know and introduce myself to that someone that stands in the middle of us and say, I know we don't know each other, but I'm coming to you today from this organization. We're doing this incredible work. I'm trying so hard to get to this person. So I think just try really hard, anything you can. And then last but not least, I think, Molly, there has to be a time that we let a funder go and make room for someone that we can get to more easily. So I don't think any of this is probably, blowing your mind. I don't think you're missing anything out there. I would just get creative, try to find a connector, and then be okay letting them go when the time comes. If we've tried a bunch and we're not making any headway, then let's find a better, more qualified funder for us. I hope that's helpful. Okay, so Cecilia, you're saying the same thing. I'm in a different country from where my funders are. The relationship with them is mostly virtual. Yeah, you know, sometimes we might think about if you find that funders are just, not interested in meeting in person, sometimes we are able to increase the level of engagement by holding a small webinar that's with a group. And sometimes funders feel less inclined to decline the invitation, if that makes sense. So the reason I think this works sometimes is, like you say, we're having this small group session for some of our partners. We'd love to just share the work with you. And what it does is it allows them to hear from the field or hear from, the leadership of the organization. So maybe we could try something like that and get them in the room and then maybe follow on from there. But, there might just be a reality that some funders just don't want to engage in this way. And while that saddens me a little because I think they're missing out, maybe we just figure out how to work within those confines. But we do see organizations having an easier time getting funders into a small group event than a one-on-one sometimes. So that's another idea.
I'm going to share a tip too. I'm putting it in the chat. There is, if you're a member of Catalyst 2030, with the follow-up of the session, we'll give you the grant writing resources. But there's also this amazing website called Organizational Global Philanthropy and Impact. And they have a listing of all the, and mainly a lot of US, but they have other parts of the world as well. And so they'll break it down. You can look by sector areas. So who's funding in education versus climate. They'll also say who they funded in some cases. So they show this matching of who they funded before. So you can reach out to other organizations that have received funding from that organization. And we found that to be helpful because I think there's a lot of people in this space that are giving, not everyone. But that link is on the chat right now if you want to have that. And actually, we'll go ahead and share the grant writing resources for everyone as well. And that, what we did is we tried to crowdsource all the grant opportunities that are out there, but there's only 300 on this list. And obviously there's a lot more, but we'll share that in the chat as well.
That's great. Thanks, Debbie. Why don't we take the last question and then we'll turn it back over to the Catalyst 2030 team. Grace, I think this would be a great one for you if you don't mind. Any insights on what to include in an email to introduce yourself and eventually ask for funding?
Yeah, absolutely. I typed this out in the chat. I'm like trying to, I'm sort of not technologically savvy, but I'll kind of explain what I said in there. But we like to, again, think about, even with an email, you're introducing yourself, answering those 3 questions. So here's an example of something you could say of, like, let's say you're reaching out to an organization and you said, I'm blank from this organization, which is dedicated to, and you would explain what your why is. So as you're just starting out, even with an outreach, you're starting at the top of it with your why. And then what we usually like to say is you go into talking about, why you think there's alignment. Because again, the biggest thing we need to focus on is, do they get your why? Do they support your why? And so we're reaching out because we see that you align around, X cause, X, this of our 30,000 foot. And then we would go into, explaining what we're doing just at a high level. So maybe saying, in order to do our why, we do this. And then we say something like, we're reaching out because we want to develop a partnership with you. So, predisposing that how they can support, would you be able to meet? And I guess I underline all of this to say that the biggest thing we hear from funders is that they want to have an impact on the world. And while that seems like kind of pie in the sky high up thinking, wishful thinking, it's very true though, of funders want to feel like they're making a difference. And by you reaching out to them and saying, you're really interested in this, we can see it, we are giving them an opportunity to have an impact and to make a difference. So you reaching out and asking for a conversation to develop a partnership is not out of the blue. It's giving a clear way for them to help to, change the world. So again, thinking about even structuring an email with answering those 3 questions in some way or another.
If I could just close out one thought, Debbie, if you don't mind, before I hand it over to you guys. You know, anytime we do any sort of fundraising sessions, the questions always err towards prospects, because that's, I think, everyone's biggest pain point: how to find them, how to engage them, how to get them interested. And if I could just, I don't know, like insert a little bit of hope and inspiration for people on this call. And the reason I love the Catalyst 2030 community is because we're all over the world. I think what I'd love to share with you is that when you're in the process of looking for potential funders for your organization, just focus at this moment in time on those funders who are aligned with your cause and who are aligned with your work. I don't want anyone to leave this call not writing down a name of a foundation, an individual government, because they don't know how to get to them. That's like step 3. Step 1 is identify them and write them down, because we're never in a million years going to get to them if we don't first write them down. And so if nothing else, if you're hoping to leave today with some ideas on prospecting, it would be to be fearless, find funders who are aligned with you, and approach it with the mindset that these guys would love to fund us. They just don't know we exist yet. Now, later, we'll prioritize those funders and then we'll strategize how to get to them. But when we're in this identification phase of the prospecting process, if they are aligned, write them down. And then we'll figure out as a team how to get to them. So that's just my parting message of hope and inspiration around prospects. We see every day of the week organizations being able to connect with funders that they never would have thought possible, only because they wrote them down and they spent time each week thinking about how do I cross their radar. So today we talked about 7 pillars of fundraising, just 7 different revenue streams you might think about. I hope maybe it might help you and your team think through how can you diversify some funding sources. And then obviously there's a huge appetite for what Grace shared, which is an altitude framing to engage funders and answer their questions. Why do you exist? What do you do? And what do you need from me? This is part 1 of this whole session. So if you are hungry for more, don't worry, there's more coming. Thank you to the Catalyst 2030 team, Hira, Debbie, Cindy. I'll send it back over to you guys. And thanks so much for spending time with us this morning. We're completely humbled and honored to be in this room with you guys today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lisa, so much. And thank you, Grace, to you as well. Let me just share my screen. It was really a very helpful and insightful session, and I think everyone agrees. And thank you everyone for participating and your engagement in the chat. It was very alive during the whole session. So if before leaving, we would like you to answer a few questions to give your feedback about the session, how engaging it was for you. So you're gonna see a poll in your screen just now. And while you're answering this, I will also share some upcoming events with you. The first one that you see on the screen is the Stories from the Field Voices of Change session, which is going to take place on Monday, 25th November, and which is going to feature 3 amazing social entrepreneurs, Vera Cordero, Mel Young, and Jack Sim. They're going to be talking about their social entrepreneurship journey while talking about their recent books published in the last months. And the other session we have is the advanced session of the Impact Measurement Learning Series. And we're going to have, again, amazing speakers from Echoing Green, Dash Ryan School Foundation. If you're looking for deepening your knowledge about the impact measurement, I really would recommend you to register and be there. You can find all the links in the chat. So the other sessions are from our Systems Change Learning Series. The first one is in 21st November and the second is in December. It's going to be focusing on the art of weaving systems change from vision to implementation. And the other one is going to follow up with the foundation of impact theory of change and logic models. So you can find all the registration link in the chat, and we really want to thank you for participating, and you're going to have all the slides and the recording and all those links in the follow-up email. So thank you all for participating. I don't know if you have any words, Grace, Lisa, or Debbie. No. So as we always do in Catalyst, please unmute yourself and say goodbye to in your native language.
Salamunu dan
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Allah
Bye
Hafiz.
bye, goodbye.
Au revoir, je suis très content.
Amolo
Bye.
malo ba na uwi? I love that.
Yes, we shall do. Bye.